Caleb Turner slammed his employee badge down on the steel table so hard, the sound cracked across the entire hangar like a gunshot. Every mechanic froze. "You can fire me," he said, his voice shaking, "but I will not sign my name to a plane that's going to kill people." CEO Victoria Ashford didn't blink. "Then you're done. Get out." What she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that in less than 24 hours, this same man she was throwing out into the cold would be the only reason her entire airline survived. And when she finally learned the truth, she would freeze in front of 200 employees, unable to speak. If you're watching this, do me a favor. Drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe in honest, hardworking people who do the right thing when nobody's watching, hit that subscribe button and stay with me all the way to the end. Because this story is going to stay with you. The night shift at Ashford International Aviation began the way it always did, with the low hum of fluorescent lights, the smell of jet fuel and machine oil, and Caleb Turner walking through the employee entrance with an old metal toolbox in his right hand. It was 9:47 p.m. He nodded at the security guard, an older man named Walter, who had worked that same desk for 19 years. "Evening, Cal," Walter said. "Evening, Walt. How's the knee?" "Still lying to me every morning. Doc says I need surgery. I say the doc needs a hobby." Caleb smiled. It was the first real smile he'd allowed himself all day. "Tell the doc to fix planes for a living. Then he'll know what a bad knee really is." Walter laughed, and Caleb kept walking past the glass trophy case that displayed the airline's awards, past the framed photograph of the company's founder, and down the long corridor that led to the maintenance floor. He had made this walk more than 3,000 times. He knew every crack in the concrete. He knew which light near the tool cage flickered when the heat kicked on. He knew that if you pressed the elevator button twice, it came faster, and that nobody in a suit had ever bothered to learn that. Caleb was 39 years old, but the men on the floor said he had the hands of a 60-year-old master and the patience of a saint. He had been an aircraft engineer once, a good one, with a corner office, a title, and a salary that came with 3 commas he never bragged about. Then his wife died, and Caleb walked away from all of it. He didn't want the office anymore. He didn't want the title. He wanted to be home during the day to pack his daughter's lunch, to sit at the small kitchen table and help her sound out words she couldn't read yet. He wanted to be the father Lily deserved after losing the mother she barely got to know. So he took the night shift. Nobody understood it. A man with his resume working under the fluorescent lights at midnight, elbow deep in hydraulic fluid. The other engineers thought he'd lost his mind. But Caleb knew exactly what he was doing. He was the only man on that entire floor who worked the night shift by choice, and he'd made peace with the reason a long time ago. He set his toolbox on the workbench and pulled on his coveralls. On the wall above his station hung a small photograph curling at the corners Lily, 7 years old, holding a paper airplane she'd made herself, grinning with a missing front tooth. He touched the corner of it the way he always did before starting his shift. "All right, kiddo," he murmured. "Let's keep him safe tonight." That was his ritual. Every night, the same words. Because to Caleb Turner, every airplane in that hangar wasn't a machine. It was a promise. A promise that somebody's father, somebody's daughter, somebody's Lily would climb aboard in the morning and make it home. He picked up his flashlight and walked toward the aircraft parked in Bay 4. That's when the trouble started. The maintenance report for aircraft 447 was sitting on his clipboard, already filled out and already signed off by the day crew. According to the paperwork, everything was cleared. Green across the board. Ready for the big inspection in the morning. Caleb read it twice. Then he frowned. There was a note buried in the fine print, a hydraulic pressure reading on the number 2 system that was sitting right at the edge of the acceptable range. Not over the line. Not technically a failure, but right on the edge. The day crew had signed it off as within tolerance. Caleb didn't like within tolerance. Not when it came to hydraulics. Not on an aircraft that was about to be inspected by federal regulators, and more importantly, not on an aircraft that would be carrying 180 passengers over the ocean 2 days from now. He climbed up onto the maintenance platform, opened the access panel, and ran his flashlight along the hydraulic lines. That's when he saw it. A hairline seep, barely visible. A thin film of fluid coating a fitting that should have been bone dry. If you weren't looking for it, if you were tired or rushing, or just trusting the paperwork, you'd never catch it. Caleb caught it. He wiped it with his glove, waited, and watched. 30 seconds later, the film returned. His stomach turned to stone. He climbed down, picked up his radio, and called it in. "This is Turner Night Maintenance Bay 4. I've got a hydraulic seep on 447 number 2 system. I'm pulling it from the inspection list until I can trace the source." There was a long pause on the other end. Then a voice came back that Caleb recognized immediately. It wasn't the shift supervisor. It was Richard Caldwell, the operations director. The suit. "Turner, this is Caldwell. Negative. Aircraft 447 is cleared. It was signed off by day crew. Leave it on the list." Caleb stared at the radio in his hand. "Sir, with respect, I'm looking at an active seep right now. It's not cleared. It's leaking. It's within tolerance. It's leaking, sir. Tolerance doesn't matter when it's actively getting worse. If that fitting fails at altitude..." "Turner." Caldwell's voice sharpened into something cold. "That aircraft is part of the inspection tomorrow morning. The inspection that determines whether this airline keeps its operating certificate. Do you understand what's riding on this?" "I understand 180 passengers are riding on it, sir." The radio went silent. Caleb stood there in the dim light of Bay 4, his heart pounding. He was 48 hours from the biggest safety inspection in the company's history, and he had just told the operations director that he was pulling an aircraft off the list. He should have been scared. Instead, all he could think about was Lily's face, and every other father's face on every other plane on every other night. He keyed the radio one more time. 447 is grounded until I clear it. That's my call. My name's on the sign-off, and I'm not signing it. Richard Caldwell arrived on the maintenance floor 11 minutes later. Caleb heard the elevator doors open and heard the sharp, angry click of expensive shoes on concrete before he ever saw the man. Caldwell didn't belong down here. He was a 52-year-old man in a tailored suit at 11 o'clock at night, and everything about him, the watch, the tie, the way he looked at the aircraft like they were numbers on a spreadsheet, announced that he had never once turned a wrench in his life. "Turner." Caldwell stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. "You want to explain to me what you think you're doing?" Caleb didn't stop working. He was tracing the hydraulic line with a rag following the seep back to its source. "I think I'm doing my job, sir." "Your job is to keep these planes on the inspection schedule." "No, sir." Caleb finally looked up. "My job is to keep these planes from falling out of the sky. The schedule's your job. Those are two different things, and tonight, they don't agree." Caldwell's face darkened. "You have any idea how much money is riding on tomorrow? We have investors flying in. We have a contract on the table that saves this entire company. And you want to pull an aircraft over a drop of fluid? It's not a drop. Come here, I'll show you." "I don't need to see it." "That's the whole problem, sir." Caleb's voice stayed level, but there was iron underneath it. "You don't want to see it. If you saw it, you couldn't pretend it isn't there." For a moment, something flickered across Caldwell's face. Not guilt exactly. Something colder. Something calculating. Then he smiled. It was the worst smile Caleb had ever seen. "You know what your problem is, Turner? You're a night mechanic who thinks he's still an engineer. You had your shot in the big leagues and you walked away from it. Now you want to lecture me about how to run an airline." Caleb set down his rag. He walked to the workbench, picked up his clipboard, and held it out. "Here's the log for 447. The seep is documented. The photos are documented. If you want that plane on the inspection list tomorrow, you sign it off, not me. Because if that fitting fails and people die, I'm not going to be the man whose name is on the paper." Caldwell didn't take the clipboard. He just stared at Caleb for a long, cold moment. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "Maybe?" Caleb picked his rag back up. "But it's mine to make, and I can live with it." Caldwell turned and walked away. But before he reached the elevator, he stopped, and without turning around, he said something Caleb would remember for the rest of his life. "You won't have a job to make mistakes at by morning." Then the elevator doors closed, and he was gone. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He never really did. He worked. He traced the hydraulic line on 447 all the way back to a corroded fitting near the pump, housing a fitting that under the pressure of a full transatlantic flight would have blown out somewhere over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, 38,000 feet in the air with 180 souls aboard and no runway for 1,000 miles in any direction. He replaced it. Then he pressure tested it. Then he tested it again. By 4 a.m., aircraft 447 was safe. Actually safe. Not within tolerance. Not signed off. Safe. But Caleb didn't stop there, because if the day crew had missed the SEEP on 447, if they'd been rushing to clear planes for the inspection, then how many others had they missed? So he started checking the rest. One by one, in the dead of night alone, Caleb Turner went aircraft to aircraft with his flashlight and his old toolbox, checking the things the paperwork said were fine. And plane after plane, he found things. A worn brake line on 302, a cracked bracket on 519, a loose sensor connection on 661 that would have thrown a false reading during flight. Small things. Overlooked things. Things that any tired crew rushing to beat a deadline would sign off as good enough. Caleb didn't believe in good enough. He fixed them. Every single one. He didn't call it in he'd learned his lesson with Caldwell. He just worked quietly the way he always did, documenting everything in his own handwriting because he no longer trusted the official log. He wrote it all down. Every finding, every repair, every serial number. And he tucked those handwritten records into the original maintenance files, folded and hidden between the pages. Because some part of him, some tired, aching, stubborn part of him, knew that the truth was going to need a witness. By sunrise, he had personally inspected and repaired critical faults on 25 aircraft. 25. He had been awake for nearly 22 hours. His hands were black with grease and cracked at the knuckles. His back screamed every time he bent over. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a quiet voice reminded him that Lily needed to be walked to school in 2 hours, and that he still had to make her lunch. He was wiping down his tools when the maintenance floor doors opened at 6:15 a.m. And this time, it wasn't Caldwell. It was Victoria Ashford. Caleb had seen the CEO exactly twice in 3 years. Once at a company holiday event, he'd stood at the back of, and once in a hallway when she'd walked past him, without a glance. Victoria Ashford was 44 years old, sharp as broken glass, and she carried herself like someone who had never lost an argument in her life. She'd inherited the company from her father, and she ran it the way he'd taught her, with numbers, with reports, and with the absolute conviction that the people in the suits knew more than the people in the coveralls. She walked onto the maintenance floor, flanked by Richard Caldwell and 2 members of her executive team. "Turner," she said. Caleb straightened up. "Yes, ma'am." "Mr. Caldwell tells me you grounded an aircraft last night, against a direct instruction, on the morning of the most important inspection in this company's history." Caleb glanced at Caldwell. The operations director stood just behind her shoulder. Hands folded his face, a careful mask of concern. And in that moment, Caleb understood exactly what had happened. Caldwell had gotten to her first. Caldwell had told his version of the story. "Ma'am," Caleb said carefully, "I found an active hydraulic seep on aircraft 447. It was leaking. I traced it, and I found a corroded fitting that would have failed in flight. I fixed it. That aircraft is safe now. Safer than it was when your day crew signed it off." "That's not what I asked." Victoria's voice was ice. "I asked whether you defied a direct instruction from Mr. Caldwell." "Yes, ma'am, I did." A murmur went through the small crowd of mechanics who had started to gather at the edges of the floor, drawn by the sight of the CEO herself standing among them. Caldwell stepped forward smoothly. "Victoria, this is exactly what I warned you about. This man has a history of insubordination. He second-guesses every decision management makes. He delays aircraft. He runs up maintenance costs. And now, on the single most important morning of this company's future, he's grounding planes and creating chaos. He shook his head, the very picture of a reasonable man pushed too far. I've tried to work with him. I've given him every chance. But we can't have one mechanic holding this entire airline hostage. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. That's not... Is it true you refused to sign the inspection sheet? Victoria cut in. Yes, but... Is it true you overrode the day crew's certification? They missed a... Yes or no, Mr. Turner? Caleb went quiet. He looked at her. Really looked at her. And he saw something he recognized because he'd seen it before, years ago in the mirror. A person so certain they were right that they'd stopped being able to hear anything else. Yes, he said quietly. It's true. Victoria nodded slowly as if he'd just confirmed everything she needed to know. Then I don't see that I have a choice. Caldwell's mask slipped for just a fraction of a second. Just long enough for the corner of his mouth to twitch. Caleb saw it. Ma'am, he said, and his voice changed not louder but heavier, the way a man's voice changes when he's about to say something he can't take back. Before you make that decision, I'm asking you for 2 minutes to come with me. Let me show you what I found, that's all. 2 minutes, then fire me if you want. But at least fire me knowing the truth. For a moment, something in Victoria hesitated. For a moment, she almost said yes, and that moment, that single moment of hesitation, would haunt her for the rest of her life. Because if she had said yes, everything that came after would have been different. But Caldwell was faster. Victoria, he said softly, leaning in. We have investors landing in 90 minutes. The inspection team is already in the building. We do not have time for a maintenance worker's theatrics. Make the call, or we lose the deal and we lose the company. And Victoria Ashford, who had been taught since childhood that hesitation was weakness, who had never once let anyone see her uncertainty, made her choice. Mr. Turner, you're fired. Effective immediately. The maintenance floor went utterly silent. Caleb stood there for a long moment. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He'd seen the decision the second she walked in the door, and he'd made his peace with it hours ago somewhere around the 15th aircraft. He reached up and unclipped his employee badge from his coveralls. He looked at it 3 years of night shifts. 3 years of quiet promises kept in the dark, and then he set it down gently on the steel workbench. I can lose my job, he said. His voice was steady, but everyone in that hangar heard the weight in it. But I cannot pretend a plane is safe when I know it isn't. I've got a daughter. She's 7. Someday she's going to fly on an airplane, and I need to be able to look her in the eye and tell her that I never once put anyone's kid at risk to save myself. He picked up his old toolbox. You do what you have to do, ma'am. So will I. And then Caleb Turner walked out of the hangar he had protected for 3 years. Nobody stopped him. But every mechanic on that floor watched him go, and every one of them knew something the CEO didn't. They knew what he'd been doing all night. The federal inspection began at 8 a.m. sharp. Victoria stood in the observation area on the mezzanine level, overlooking the main hangar with Caldwell beside her, and her executive team arranged behind her like a wall of expensive suits. Below the inspection team, 6 federal aviation examiners with clipboards and diagnostic equipment moved through the fleet of 25 aircraft, checking every system, every log, every certification. Victoria's stomach was a knot of tension. The truth was, she'd known for months that the company was in trouble. The maintenance costs Caldwell kept warning her about. The aging fleet. The pressure from the board. If this inspection went badly, if even a handful of aircraft failed, the airline's operating certificate would be suspended, the investor deal would collapse, and everything her father had built would come apart in her hands. She could not afford to fail. How's it looking? She asked Caldwell without turning her head. They're being thorough, he said. But we're prepared. Everything was signed off. We're clean. Victoria nodded, but she noticed something. Caldwell was sweating. It was a cool morning. The hangar was climate-controlled. And Richard Caldwell, the calmest, coldest man she'd ever met, had a thin sheen of sweat on his upper lip. She filed it away and said nothing. Below the lead inspector, a silver-haired woman named Diane Foster, who had been examining aircraft for 30 years, moved to aircraft 447. She climbed the platform. She opened the access panel. And she went very, very still. Victoria felt the knot in her stomach pull tight. Foster ran her flashlight along the hydraulic system for a long time. Then she called two of her colleagues over. They conferred quietly. One of them pulled out a phone and started taking pictures. They pulled the maintenance log. They read it. They flipped pages. And then Foster looked up, not at the aircraft, but up toward the mezzanine directly at Victoria. And Victoria's heart stopped. Because she couldn't read the woman's expression. "Get down there," she whispered to Caldwell. "Find out what's happening." Caldwell went down. Victoria watched him cross the floor, watched him speak to the inspectors, watched Foster hand him the maintenance log and point at something. She watched Caldwell's shoulders stiffen. Then Foster raised her voice enough that it carried up to the mezzanine. "Who did this work?" Caldwell said something Victoria couldn't hear. "No," Foster said. "The signed log says this fitting was replaced and pressure tested at 0400 this morning. But this signature," she tapped the page, "isn't on the official certification. It's handwritten. It's tucked into the file. Who did this?" And now other inspectors were calling out from other aircraft. "Same here, 302 has a documented brake line replacement that isn't in the official log. Handwritten. 519's got a bracket repair. Handwritten note in the file, not certified through the system. 661's, same thing. Somebody went through these aircraft last night and fixed things that weren't in the paperwork." Victoria came down the stairs. She didn't remember deciding to. She just found herself walking onto the hangar floor into the middle of the inspection as the examiners moved from aircraft to aircraft and kept finding the same thing over and over again. Handwritten records, repairs that weren't supposed to exist, faults that the official log said had never been there, faults that someone had quietly found, quietly fixed, and quietly documented in his own hand, because he no longer trusted the system to tell the truth. Diane Foster held up a thick sheaf of folded papers. "Ms. Ashford, I've been inspecting aircraft for 3 decades, and I have never seen anything like this. Somebody went through your entire fleet last night, all 25 aircraft, and corrected critical safety faults that your official maintenance logs claim were never present." She looked at Victoria hard. "Some of these would have been catastrophic. This hydraulic fitting on 447 alone, this would have failed in flight. You'd have lost the aircraft." The hangar had gone completely silent. 200 employees. Mechanics, pilots, ground crew, the executive team, all of them staring at the CEO of Ashford International Aviation as she stood in the middle of the floor holding a stack of handwritten records that had just saved her company. And Victoria asked the question that would freeze the entire hangar, the question that would replay in her mind for years. Who fixed all 25 of these planes overnight? She expected an engineer to step forward. She expected a manager to take credit. She expected someone from her executive team to explain how it had happened. Instead, nobody said a word. And then slowly, every mechanic, every pilot, every technician in that hangar turned their eyes toward the same place. The doors. The empty doors, where a man with an old toolbox had walked out less than 2 hours earlier. Victoria followed their gaze. Who are you looking at? There's no one there." That's when the lead pilot stepped forward. His name was Captain Daniel Brooks. He was 58 years old, a former Air Force pilot with 20,000 flight hours, and he had a reputation as a man who did not raise his voice and did not waste words. He walked into the middle of that silent hangar, and he looked Victoria Ashford dead in the eye. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice carried to every corner of that building. "The man who fixed these planes," he paused, "is the man you fired this morning." Victoria Ashford froze. Everything in her stopped. The blood, the breath, the certainty she'd carried through the door like armor. She stood in the middle of the hangar holding 25 handwritten records in her hands, and she could not move, and she could not speak. "His name is Caleb Turner," Brooks continued, his voice rising now steady and hard as a runway. He's a single father. He works the night shift so he can raise his little girl during the day. And every single night for 3 years, that man has stayed after his shift off the clock for free, no overtime, no recognition to check the planes the day crew signed off, because he doesn't trust paperwork. He trusts his own 2 hands. Brooks pointed at the stack of papers in her grip. You want to know who found the fault on 447? He did. You want to know who stayed awake for 22 hours, going aircraft to aircraft, while the rest of us slept? He did. You want to know who saved this company this morning? His voice cracked just slightly. You fired him for it. Victoria's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Behind her she heard a sound, a small, involuntary sound, and she turned to see Richard Caldwell, trying very hard to keep his face neutral and failing. And in that instant, standing in the silence of 200 people, holding the proof in her own 2 hands, Victoria Ashford understood something that would change the rest of her life. She hadn't fired a difficult employee. She hadn't removed a troublemaker. She had thrown away the one man who was keeping her company alive. And she had done it because a man in an expensive suit had told her to, and she had never once bothered to walk down to the floor and look. Where is he? She said. Her voice came out small, broken. Nothing like the CEO who'd walked in that morning. Where did he go? Nobody answered, because nobody knew, because nobody. Caleb Turner had picked up his old toolbox, and he had walked out into the cold, and he had gone home to make his daughter's lunch, never once imagining that behind him in a silent hangar, the most powerful woman in the company was finally far too late learning his name. Captain Brooks looked at her, and there was no cruelty in his face. Only something quieter and sadder. He's gone, ma'am, Brooks said. The good ones always are. You just usually don't notice until they're already out the door. Victoria Ashford stood alone in the center of her own hangar, surrounded by 200 people and the wreckage of a decision she couldn't take back, holding the handwriting of the man she'd fired. And for the first time since her father had taught her that strength meant never showing doubt, Victoria Ashford didn't know what to do. The inspection paused around her. The whispers started. And somewhere across town, in a small diner near the airport, a tired single father set his old toolbox down on the seat beside him, ordered a cup of coffee, and had no idea that the entire course of his life had just changed. The coffee had gone cold in front of Caleb Turner, but he hadn't noticed. He sat in the corner booth of the Skyline Diner with his old toolbox on the seat beside him, like an old friend, staring at nothing, his hands wrapped around a mug he'd forgotten to drink from. The waitress had come by twice to refill it, and both times she'd looked at him a little longer than necessary, the way people look at a man who's clearly carrying something heavy. "You want anything to eat, hun?" she asked on the third pass. "No," Caleb said. Then, catching himself, he looked up and softened. "No, thank you. Just the coffee's fine." "You look like a man who lost his dog." Caleb almost laughed. "Lost my job, actually. About 2 hours ago." The waitress, her name tag said Rose, and she had the kind of face that had seen every kind of trouble walk through those doors, slid into the booth across from him without being asked. "That's so. What did you do?" "Told the truth." "Ah," Rose nodded slowly, like that explained everything. "Yeah, that'll do it every time." Caleb finally took a sip of the cold coffee and grimaced. 12 years I've been in aviation. 3 of them at this last place. And you know what I keep thinking about? Not the paycheck. Not the pension I just walked away from. He set the mug down. "I keep thinking about my daughter's lunch. She likes the crust cut off. If I don't get home in 40 minutes, she's going to eat cafeteria pizza again, and she hates the cafeteria pizza." Rose smiled. "How old?" 7, going on 40. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. "Her mom passed 3 years ago. It's just us." The smile faded from Rose's face and turned into something gentler. "Then you go home and cut the crust off, honey. The job'll sort itself out, or it won't. But that little girl only gets one dad, and he needs to be there for lunch." She patted the table twice and stood up. "Coffee's on me today. Go on." Caleb looked at her for a moment, and something loosened in his chest. "Thank you, Rose." Go be a dad, Cal. He didn't ask how she knew his name. She probably didn't, probably just heard something honest in a tired man's voice and decided he was the kind who deserved a warm word. He stood, dropped a 5 on the table anyway, picked up his toolbox and walked out into the morning. He had exactly enough time to make it home, cut the crust off a peanut butter sandwich, and pretend to Lily that everything was fine. He was very good at pretending everything was fine. He'd had 3 years of practice. What he did not know, what he could not have known, was that back at the hangar, the entire machinery of Ashford International Aviation had ground to a halt around the empty space where he used to stand, and the most powerful woman in the company was falling apart in front of 200 people. Victoria Ashford still hadn't moved. She stood in the center of the hangar floor with the stack of handwritten records in her hands, and the paper had started to tremble because her hands had started to tremble, and she couldn't make them stop. Ms. Ashford. It was Diane Foster, the lead inspector. She'd come down off the platform and crossed the floor, and now she stood in front of Victoria with an expression that was hard to read somewhere between professional and something almost like pity. I need to talk to you, Foster said quietly. In private, now. Victoria nodded numbly and let herself be led toward a small maintenance office off the side of the floor. Caldwell moved to follow. Not you, Foster said without even looking at him. Caldwell stopped. I'm the operations director. Whatever concerns this airline concerns me. Foster turned around slowly. Mr. Caldwell, I've been examining aircraft for 30 years, and in about 10 minutes, I'm going to have some very specific questions about how 25 aircraft came to have critical faults that your official maintenance logs swear up and down were never there. So yes, this concerns you. But right now, I'm going to speak to your CEO, alone. She held his gaze. Unless you'd rather we do this with a federal investigator in the room. I can arrange that too. Caldwell's jaw worked, but he stepped back. Inside the office, Foster shut the door and set her own copies of the handwritten records on the desk. Ms. Ashford, I'm going to be straight with you because I think you've had enough people in this building tell you what you want to hear. You understand what almost happened this morning. Victoria's voice failed. She tried again. I understand there were faults, that they were fixed. No. Foster leaned forward. You need to hear this the way it actually is. Aircraft 447 was scheduled for a transatlantic route in 48 hours. That hydraulic fitting your man replaced last night was corroded through. Under the pressure of a full flight, it would have failed somewhere over open ocean. You would have lost hydraulic control on the number 2 system at altitude. Best case, an emergency landing with 180 terrified people. Worst case. She stopped. I've filled out the paperwork for the worst case before, Ms. Ashford. I've stood in fields and looked at the worst case. I don't ever want to do it again. Victoria sat down heavily in the office chair. And it wasn't just 447. Foster continued, her voice low and relentless. Your fleet was riddled with deferred faults that got signed off as clean. Somebody has been cutting corners in your maintenance department for a long time, and one went through your entire fleet last night and caught what a whole department missed. She tapped the papers. This handwriting saved your company this morning, and you fired the hand that wrote it. Victoria pressed her palms flat against the desk to stop them shaking. I didn't know. I believe you didn't. That's almost worse. Foster straightened up. Because it means you didn't know what was happening in your own house. Are you going to pass us? Victoria heard herself ask, and hated how small the question sounded. How corporate, how much like the woman who'd walked in that morning. Foster studied her for a long moment. Here's where we stand. Because of the work done last night, your aircraft are right now airworthy. I can certify that. What I cannot certify is the integrity of your maintenance program because the program didn't catch any of this. The program signed off on a plane that would have gone down. She gathered her papers. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to conditionally certify your fleet. But I'm opening an investigation into your maintenance operations. And Ms. Ashford, if I find out that these faults weren't just missed, that they were known and buried on purpose, that stops being a safety violation and starts being a criminal matter. Do you understand me? Victoria understood. She understood far more than Foster realized. Because a piece had just clicked into place in the back of her mind, Caldwell sweating in a cool hangar. Caldwell so certain there was no time to look. Caldwell, who had made sure she fired the one man who was checking the work. "I understand," Victoria said quietly. "Thank you for your honesty, Ms. Foster. It's more than I got from anyone in my own building." Foster paused at the door. "One more thing. That mechanic Turner. I don't know the man, but I read his notes. Every repair documented. Every serial number logged in his own hand. Timestamps. Photos referenced. He didn't do that to protect himself. A man protecting himself doesn't hide his records inside the files. He hands them to a supervisor and covers his back." She shook her head. "He hid them so that if something happened, if a plane went down and they came looking, the truth would still be there for somebody to find. He documented it for the dead in case he couldn't save them." She opened the door. "That's not a man who deserved to be fired, Ms. Ashford. That's a man who deserved a medal." And then she was gone, leaving Victoria alone in the small office, with the truth pressing down on her from every side. She sat there for a long time. Then she stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked back out onto the floor, and found 200 people who had watched her fire the wrong man, all of them pretending very hard to be busy, none of them able to look at her, except one. Captain Daniel Brooks was leaning against a support column near the aircraft, arms crossed, and he was looking right at her. Victoria walked over to him. She didn't know what she was going to say until she was already saying it. "Captain Brooks, you all knew what he did. Every night for 3 years, and none of you ever told me." Brooks pushed off this column. "With respect, ma'am, when would we have told you?" There was no anger in it, just a plain tired honesty. "The last time you came down to this floor before today was never. You want to know Caleb Turner's schedule. He clocked in at 10 at night and clocked out at 6 in the morning. You clocked in at 8, and you never once set foot below the mezzanine. There was no moment, ma'am. There was no room where you and Caleb were ever going to be in the same place, because you built a company where the people up top and the people down here don't breathe the same air." Victoria absorbed the blow. She'd spent her whole life learning to never let anyone see it land. Today, she let it land. "Tell me about him," she said. "Please." Brooks studied her, and something shifted in his face, as if he'd decided she actually meant it. "All right, come here." He led her to the maintenance floor's break area, a cramped room with a coffee machine, a battered couch, and a wall of lockers. He stopped in front of one locker, second row from the bottom. Turner C. was written on a piece of masking tape across the front. "He didn't lock it," Brooks said. "Never did. Said if a man'll steal from a mechanic's locker, he needs the stuff worse than Caleb did." He opened it. Inside there was almost nothing. A spare set of coveralls, a pair of work boots, a thermos, and taped to the inside of the door a child's drawing crayon, a wobbly airplane, a stick figure man standing next to it with an enormous smile. Underneath, in careful oversized letters, a child had written, "My dad keeps the planes safe." Victoria stared at it. "That's Lily," Brooks said quietly. "She made him that when she was 5. He's had it taped up there ever since. Every guy on this floor's seen it. Every guy on this floor knows that man drives home every morning, makes that little girl breakfast, walks her to school, sleeps 4 hours, and comes right back to do it again." He shut the locker gently. "You want to know why nobody stepped forward when you asked who fixed the planes, Ms. Ashford? It wasn't loyalty to Caleb. It was shame. Every man on this floor was ashamed because we all knew he was the best of us, and we all watched him carry your badge out the door, and none of us said a word to stop it." Victoria felt her eyes burn. She hadn't cried in front of another person since she was a child. Her father had cured her of that early. Weakness, he'd called it. Never let them see uncertainty. She turned away so Brooks wouldn't see, and she got herself under control, and when she turned back, her voice was steady. "I need his address." Brooks raised an eyebrow. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to fix what I broke, if he'll let me." "He won't want your money." "I'm not offering money." Brooks looked at her for a long, appraising moment. Then he pulled out his phone. "HR's got his file. but I'll save you the trouble." He wrote an address on a scrap of paper and held it out, but he didn't let go when she took it. "Ms. Ashford, that man just lost his job protecting your company. If you go over there and offer him some corporate settlement to make yourself feel better and make him go away quiet, I will personally quit and I'll take half the pilots in this building with me. You understand?" "I understand." "Then go on, but go as a person, not as a CEO." Victoria took the paper. "There's something else I need to handle first." She walked back out onto the floor, and this time, she wasn't looking for a mechanic. She was looking for Richard Caldwell. She found him near the office on his phone, talking in a low, urgent voice. He hung up the second he saw her coming. "Victoria," he said, and his voice slid immediately back into that smooth, reasonable register. "This is a mess, but we contained it. The fleet's conditionally certified. The investors are still—" "Who were you on the phone with?" Caldwell blinked. "What?" "Just now. Who were you talking to?" "The hour contact with the investment group. Managing expectations." "Victoria, this is what I do. I handle the relationships that keep this." "The investment group," Victoria repeated slowly. "You mean Alexander Whitmore?" Something flickered behind Caldwell's eyes. "That's right. Whitmore's people. We've been working this deal for months. You know that. I do know that. What I'm just now starting to understand is why." Victoria stepped closer, close enough to keep her voice down, close enough that no one else could hear. "Richard, this morning an inspector told me that my fleet was riddled with faults that were signed off as clean. Faults somebody knew about. She used the word buried, and you know what I keep coming back to." Caldwell's face was very still. "You were sweating," Victoria said. "In a climate-controlled hangar on a cool morning, you had sweat on your lip. I've watched you sit through board meetings that could have ended your career without blinking. But this morning, watching those inspectors open up 447, you were scared to death." She tilted her head. "Why were you scared, Richard? If everything was signed off clean, if we were prepared, if we had nothing to hide, why were you the only man in this building who was afraid of what they'd find?" Caldwell recovered fast. He was good, she'd give him that. "Victoria, I was under enormous stress. We all were. This inspection was everything. Of course I was on edge. Last night you told me there was no time. No time to let Turner show me what he'd found. No time for a maintenance worker's theatrics. Make the call or lose the deal, you said." She held his gaze. "You pushed me to fire him. You pushed me hard. And then it turns out he was the only man in this building who found the faults that would have killed people. That's a strange thing, Richard. That's a strange thing for the operations director to be so determined to get rid of the one man doing the operations right. Now you listen to me." Caldwell's voice dropped and hardened, and for the first time the mask came all the way off. "You've had a shock this morning. You're not thinking clearly. I have run the operations of this airline for 11 years. 11 years I've kept this company breathing while you sat in that office and looked at reports. Do not stand there and accuse me of—" "I haven't accused you of anything yet." Victoria's voice was ice now, the ice she'd inherited from her father, the ice she was suddenly viciously grateful for. But the inspector opened an investigation, and she used a word, Richard. She said if those faults were known and buried on purpose, it stops being a safety violation and becomes a criminal matter. She watched the color drain from his face. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back to your office and you're going to touch nothing. No files, no emails, no phone calls to Whitmore. Because if I find out you've deleted so much as a paperclip's worth of records, I will hand the investigators every reason they need to look at you first." She turned to walk away, then stopped. "And Richard? The next time you tell me there's no time to hear the truth, I'm going to remember this morning, and I'm going to make the time." She left him standing there. She didn't see it, but the moment her back was turned, Richard Caldwell pulled out his phone again, and his hands were not entirely steady, and he typed a message to a number that wasn't saved in his contacts. "We have a problem. She's asking questions." The reply came back within a minute. "Then handle it. You know what's at stake. Victoria drove to the address Brooks had given her herself. She didn't call a car. She didn't bring an assistant. She drove her own car through parts of the city she'd never had reason to see, past strip malls and gas stations and modest little houses with chain-link fences, and the whole way she rehearsed what she was going to say and threw it all out, because none of it was right. The house was small. Single-story pale blue paint that had faded to gray on the sunny side, a patch of yard that somebody clearly tried to keep nice on, no time and no money. There was a child's bicycle lying on its side in the driveway, pink with white streamers on the handlebars. Victoria sat in her car for a full 5 minutes before she could make herself get out. She knocked. Footsteps. The door opened and there was Caleb Turner, but not the mechanic from the hangar. This was a man in a t-shirt and jeans, a dish towel over one shoulder, and behind him she could hear a television playing a cartoon and a child's voice asking who was at the door. The recognition hit his face like a slap. His whole body went rigid. "Ms. Ashford." He said it flat. "Careful." He pulled the door most of the way closed behind him and stepped out onto the small porch, lowering his voice. "What are you doing here?" "Mr. Turner, How did you get my address?" "Captain Brooks gave it to me. I made him. Don't be angry with him." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You fired me this morning, in front of my whole crew. Then you drove to my house where my daughter is on the one day. I've got to figure out how I'm going to pay for that." He shook his head. "Whatever this is, a settlement, a non-disclosure, whatever your lawyers cooked up, you can mail it. I'm not doing it on my porch with Lily inside." "That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" Victoria opened her mouth, and all the rehearsed corporate language died in her throat, and what came out instead was the plain truth. "Because I was wrong, and I couldn't sit in my office one more minute knowing it. I came to say it to your face. I fired the best man I had, and I did it because a liar in an expensive suit told me to, and I never once had the decency to walk down to the floor and look at what you found." Her voice cracked, and she let it. 25 planes, Mr. Turner. You saved 25 planes, and God knows how many lives, and I paid you back by taking your job. I don't have the words for how sorry I am. I don't think there are words." Caleb stared at her. For a long moment, the only sound was the cartoon playing inside the house. "You could have killed people," he said finally, quietly. "You know that. Not you personally, but that plane. 447. If I'd signed that sheet like Caldwell wanted, that plane goes down over the Atlantic in 2 days, and 180 people never come home. And their kids." He stopped, and his eyes flicked back toward the door, toward the sound of his own child. "Their kids grow up like mine, setting a place at the table for somebody who's never walking back through the door." "I know," Victoria whispered. "The inspector told me. She told me all of it." "Then you know why I couldn't sign it. It was never about the job." "I know that now." "Daddy," a small voice from inside. "Who is it?" Caleb turned his head. "Just somebody from work, baby. 2 minutes. Finish your show." "Is my sandwich almost ready?" "Almost, kiddo. Crust's coming off right now." Victoria felt something break open in her chest. She thought of the drawing taped inside his locker. "My dad keeps the plane safe." She thought of this man who'd worked 22 straight hours, who'd been fired that same morning, standing in his kitchen, cutting the crust off a peanut butter sandwich because his daughter didn't like it, acting for that little girl's sake, like the world hadn't just fallen out from under him. "You cut the crust off," she said stupidly. Caleb looked at her, and some of the hardness in his face gave way to bafflement. "What?" "Nothing. I'm sorry. It's just nothing." She pressed her lips together. "Mr. Turner, I'm not here to offer you a settlement. I'm not here to make you sign anything or go away quietly. I'm here to ask you to come back. Come back. To the company. Your job, and more than your job." Victoria's words came faster now, the plan forming even as she spoke it. "The inspector opened an investigation. She thinks the faults weren't just missed, she thinks they were buried on purpose. And I think she's right. I think Caldwell knew. I think he's been cutting corners for years and covering it up, and I think it's connected to this investment deal in a way I don't fully understand yet. But I can't prove any of it because I don't understand the maintenance side well enough to even know what I'm looking at." She took a breath. "You do. You documented everything. You have years of it, don't you? The warnings, the emails, the reports that got ignored." Caleb went very still. "I saw the handwritten records you hid in the files," Victoria said. "The inspector showed me. That's not the record of a man protecting himself. That's the record of a man who's been fighting a war alone for a long time and keeping evidence because he knew someday somebody would need it." She looked at him. "Somebody needs it now. Mr. Turner, I need it now. I need you." Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You have any idea what you're asking?" "Tell me. You're asking me to walk back into a building where the operations director has been trying to get rid of me for 2 years and help you go after him. A man with money behind him. A man with an investor behind him. And you don't even know how deep it goes yet." He shook his head slowly. "I've got a daughter, Ms. Ashford. If I take a swing at Richard Caldwell and miss, I'm not just unemployed. I'm blacklisted. No airline in the country hires the mechanic who cried conspiracy and lost, and then who cuts her crust off, who walks her to school. I'll protect you. You fired me this morning." The words hung in the air. Victoria didn't flinch from them. "You're right. This morning I fired you on the word of a man in a suit, because I've spent my whole life believing the people in suits know more than the people doing the work. My father taught me that. He taught me a lot of things, and some of them nearly got 180 people killed today." She met his eyes. "So I'm not going to stand here and tell you to trust me because I'm the CEO. I know exactly what my word was worth to you this morning. Nothing. Less than nothing." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a card, but not a business card. It was the scrap of paper Brooks had given her with his address on it, and she turned it over and wrote a number on the back and held it out. "That's my personal cell, not my assistant, not my office. Me. You call it any hour of the day or night and I answer. That's the only thing I have to offer you right now. Not a promise because my promises aren't worth anything to you yet. Just a phone number and the chance to earn it back." Caleb looked at the paper but didn't take it. Inside the house, small footsteps came running, and before he could stop her, the door swung open, and Lily appeared 7 years old, dark hair in a messy ponytail, a gap where her front tooth used to be, wearing a t-shirt with a cartoon airplane on it. She looked up at Victoria with open, fearless curiosity. "Hi, are you Daddy's boss?" Victoria crouched down without thinking about it the way she hadn't crouched down to a child's level in years. Yes. I suppose I am." "Daddy fixes the planes," Lily announced proudly. "He keeps them safe so nobody gets hurt. He's the best one. All the other guys say so." Victoria felt her throat close. "I know he does, sweetheart. I know." "Are you going to give him a raise?" Lily asked hopefully. "Because he said if he ever got a raise, we could go to the ocean. I've never seen the ocean." "Lily," Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. "Go finish your show, baby. Grown-up talk." "But—" "Go on." Lily huffed the way 7-year-olds do, but she went, and she shot one more curious look back at Victoria before disappearing inside. For a moment, neither adult spoke. Then Caleb reached out and took the piece of paper from Victoria's hand. He didn't say yes. He didn't say anything about coming back. He just closed his fingers around the number, and Victoria understood that it was not agreement. It was a door left open a crack, a chance to earn it back. Nothing more. "I need to think," Caleb said, "and I need to make my daughter's lunch." "Of course." Victoria stood up. "Of course. Thank you for hearing me out. That's more than I deserved." She was halfway down the walk when Caleb spoke again. "Ms. Ashford." She turned. "Whatever Caldwell's into," Caleb said quietly, "be careful. A man doesn't bury faults on 25 aircraft to cut costs." Nobody's that reckless just to save money on maintenance. His eyes were steady and serious. He wanted those planes to fail that inspection. Think about that. He didn't want them signed off clean, he wanted them to fail. And the only reason a man wants his own company's planes to fail an inspection, he let it hang, is if he's getting paid more for the company failing than for it succeeding. Victoria stood frozen on the walkway, and the last piece of it clicked into place with a cold, sick certainty. Whitmore, the investor, the deal that had been months in the making. He's not trying to save the company, she said slowly. No, ma'am. Caleb picked up the dish towel from his shoulder. I don't think he ever was. I think somebody figured out that a company that fails a federal safety inspection sells a whole lot cheaper than one that passes. And I think you were about to hand it to them for pennies on the dollar and thank them for taking it off your hands. He offered her the smallest, grimmest ghost of a smile. But that's just a night mechanic's theory. What do I know? And then he stepped back inside his small blue house, and Victoria heard him call out, "All right, kiddo, one crustless sandwich coming up," in a voice so warm and light that no one on earth would have guessed the man had lost his job that same morning and just handed his CEO the thread that would unravel a conspiracy. The door closed. Victoria stood in the driveway next to the little pink bicycle with the white streamers. And for the first time in her career, she understood exactly how badly she'd been played and exactly who she needed standing beside her to make it right. She got in her car. She sat for a moment. Then she pulled out her own phone and she made a call, not to Caldwell, not to the investors, not to her board. She called Diane Foster. Ms. Foster? It's Victoria Ashford. You told me this morning that if those faults were buried on purpose, it becomes a criminal matter. She gripped the wheel. I think they were, and I think I know why. But I'm going to need your help to prove it, and I'm going to need you to keep this investigation open no matter how much pressure comes down on you to close it. Because I think somebody with a lot of money is about to find out I'm asking questions. And I think they're going to try very hard to make me stop. There was a pause on the line. Then Foster's voice came back dry and steady, and just a little bit warmer than it had been that morning. Ms. Ashford, I've been doing this 30 years. You think I don't know what it looks like when somebody wants a fleet to fail? A short breath. I flagged this deal the second I saw who the buyer was. You want to catch him? Then don't you close a single thing. Don't cancel that acquisition yet. Don't tip your hand. You let them think they've won, and you let me build the case. Can you do that? Can you sit across a table from Richard Caldwell and Alexander Whitmore and smile like you don't know? Victoria thought of her father. Never let them see uncertainty. For the first time in her life, the lesson was actually going to be useful. Ms. Foster, she said, smiling at men I want to destroy is the one thing my father actually trained me to do well. She hung up, started the car and pulled away from the little blue house, and in her rearview mirror framed in the window, she caught one last glimpse of Caleb Turner lifting his daughter up onto a kitchen chair. The two of them laughing at something. She couldn't hear a single father and his little girl in a small house at the edge of the airport, utterly unaware that the war for the future of an entire airline had just been declared on their behalf. And across the city, in a glass office 40 floors above the street, Richard Caldwell's phone buzzed with a message from Alexander Whitmore. It said only, the inspection was supposed to fail. It didn't. Fix this, or I find someone who will. Caldwell set the phone down on his desk, looked out at the runway in the distance where the planes he'd tried to sabotage were taking off safely one by one, and began very quietly to think about how to make Caleb Turner disappear for good. Caleb Turner didn't call the number for 2 days. He carried that scrap of paper around in his pocket the whole time through walking Lily to school, through filling out 4 job applications at other maintenance shops, through 2 rejections that came back faster than they should have, faster than was normal, in a way that made the cold feeling in his gut spread a little wider. He'd worked in this industry for 12 years. He knew everybody. And suddenly, on the 3rd phone call, an old friend named Marcus, who ran the maintenance operation over at a regional carrier, told him the thing he'd been dreading. "Cal," Marcus said, and his voice was careful apologetic. "Look, off the record, somebody's been making calls about you." Caleb went still in his kitchen, the phone pressed to his ear, Lily's cereal bowl in his other hand. What kind of calls? The kind that end careers, buddy. Words going around that you're a troublemaker, that you fabricate maintenance issues to make management look bad, that you got let go from Ashford for insubordination and falsifying records. A pause. I know it's garbage, Cal. Anybody who's ever worked with you knows it's garbage, but it's coming from high up and it's coming with names attached, and I've got a family too. I can't be the guy who hires the industry pariah. I'm sorry. Caleb set the cereal bowl down very slowly. Somebody's telling people I falsified records. That's the word. That's exactly backwards, Marcus. I got fired because I refused to falsify records. I believe you. I do. But it doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what a hiring committee believes when they Google your name and find... Marcus stopped. You should look yourself up, Cal. There's stuff out there. I don't know where it came from, but it's out there. Caleb hung up, opened his laptop, and searched his own name. He found it in about 30 seconds. A trade industry forum, an anonymous post dated the day after he was fired. It laid the whole thing out in careful, professional-sounding language. A rogue mechanic at a major airline who'd been terminated for falsifying safety records and creating false alarms that cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. No names in the post itself, but enough detail that anybody in the industry would connect it to him within an hour. And underneath a handful of replies, all agreeing, all piling on all, from accounts created within the last 2 days. Caleb stared at the screen for a long time. Then he understood. This wasn't damage. This was a message. Caldwell wasn't just getting rid of him, he was making sure Caleb could never work in aviation again. Making sure that if Caleb ever opened his mouth about what he'd found, he'd already be branded a liar and a fraud, his word worthless before he ever said it. It was insurance. Bury the man's credibility before he can use it. Which meant Caldwell was afraid of exactly one thing, that Caleb would talk. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the scrap of paper with Victoria Ashford's number on it. Lily wandered into the kitchen, dragging a stuffed rabbit by one ear. "Daddy, you look mad." Caleb rearranged his face instantly. "Not mad, kiddo, just thinking. About the planes. About the planes." He crouched down to her level. "Hey, Lilybug, can I ask you something? If you knew somebody did something bad, something that could hurt people, but telling the truth about it was gonna be hard and maybe get us in trouble for a while, what would you do?" Lily considered this with the total seriousness only a 7-year-old can bring to a question. "Tell the truth," she said like it was obvious. "You always say, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Caleb felt his eyes sting. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, I do say that, don't I? Did I get it right?" "You got it right, baby. You got it exactly right." He pulled her into a hug she squirmed out of after 2 seconds, and then he stood and he dialed the number. Victoria answered on the first ring. "This is Victoria." "It's Turner." There was a beat of silence, and then her voice came back, and he could hear that she was trying not to sound too eager, too relieved. "Mr. Turner, I'm glad you called. Somebody's been calling around the industry telling people I falsify safety records." Caleb kept his voice low, glancing toward the living room, where Lily had settled back in front of her cartoon. "There's a post online. Anonymous. Dated the day after you fired me. I just got turned down for a job I was more than qualified for, and I know why now." He took a breath. "So I'm calling to tell you that whatever you're planning, I'm in. Not because I trust you yet. I don't. But because Caldwell just made it real clear that he's more scared of me talking than I ever realized. And I don't take kindly to a man threatening the roof over my daughter's head." He heard Victoria exhale slowly on the other end. "He's smearing you," she said. "That's God. That's exactly the kind of thing he'd do. Salt the earth so no one believes you before you even speak." A pause. "Mr. Turner, listen to me. I need you to save everything. Screenshots of that post, the times you got rejected, the names, all of it. Because that smear campaign isn't just an attack on you, it's evidence. It's proof that Caldwell had a motive to destroy your credibility, and men don't do that unless there's something they're afraid you'll say. I already saved it. Of course you did. There was something almost like a laugh in her voice, tired and grim. You document everything. You've been documenting for years, haven't you? Somebody had to. Can you come in? Not to the hangar that's Caldwell's territory, and I don't want him seeing you. Somewhere private. I'll bring Diane Foster, the inspector. She's opened a formal investigation, and she's on our side, but she needs the maintenance history laid out by somebody who actually understands it. That's you. Victoria hesitated. And Mr. Turner, I have to be honest with you about something before you say yes. This is bigger than Caldwell now. There's an investor, Alexander Whitmore. And I have reason to believe the two of them engineered this whole crisis together, that they wanted the inspection to fail so Whitmore could buy the airline cheap. If that's true, then we're not going up against one bad manager. We're going up against real money and real power. And those people don't fight fair. You've already seen that. A pause. So, if you want to walk away, I'll understand. I won't blame you. You have a little girl to think about. Caleb looked toward the living room, where that little girl was laughing at something on the television, safe and warm and completely unaware. That's exactly why I'm not walking away, he said. Where and when? They met the next morning at a law office downtown. Victoria's personal attorney, a sharp, gray-haired woman named Patricia Vance, who had agreed to let them use a conference room and keep everything under privilege. Foster was already there when Caleb arrived, and she stood up the moment he walked in and did something that caught him completely off guard. She shook his hand and held it. Mr. Turner, I read every one of your records, 3 times. Her grip was firm. In 30 years of inspecting aircraft, I've handed out a lot of violations and I've grounded a lot of planes, but I have never once seen a single individual catch what an entire maintenance department missed and document it the way you did. You saved 180 lives on 447 alone, probably a lot more across the fleet. I don't know if anybody's said it to you plainly yet, so I'm going to. She looked him dead in the eye. Thank you. On behalf of every passenger who's going to walk off those planes and hug their families without ever knowing your name, thank you. Caleb didn't know what to do with that. He'd spent 3 years being invisible. He looked down at his boots. I was just doing my job. No, Foster said. You were doing everyone's job. That's the problem. That's exactly the problem we're here to fix. They sat down. Caleb had brought a bag, an old canvas duffel heavy, and he set it on the conference table and unzipped it, and he began to pull out folders. Dozens of them. Manila folders, spiral notebooks, printed emails, photographs. All of it organized, all of it labeled in his careful block handwriting. Victoria stared. How long have you been keeping this? Since about 8 months in. Caleb spread the folders out. That's when I first noticed the pattern. I'd catch a fault on the night shift, write it up, submit it through the system, and then it'd disappear. The next day, the aircraft would show as cleared, no record of my report. First couple times, I figured I'd made a mistake in the paperwork. Then it happened again. And again. He pulled out one folder thick with printed emails. So I started keeping my own copies. Every report I submitted, I saved. Every time one vanished from the system, I noted it. Every email I sent up the chain warning about a fault, I printed and kept. He looked at Foster. You want to see a pattern? Here's your pattern. 2 years of it. Foster pulled the folder toward her and began to read, and as she read, her face changed. These are addressed to Caldwell, she said slowly. Directly. You reported the corrosion issue on the hydraulic systems 18 months ago. Fleet-wide, Caleb said. I told him the fittings on the whole 447 series were corroding faster than the maintenance schedule accounted for. I said we needed to move up the replacement interval or we were going to have a failure. I put it in writing. 3 times. He tapped the folder. Every time I got the same answer back. Budget doesn't allow it. Defer to next cycle. Within tolerance. His jaw tightened. That phrase, within tolerance. He used it like a magic spell. As long as a number was technically inside the range, he could sign off on anything and blame me if I pushed back. Victoria had gone very pale. 18 months. You warned him 18 months ago, and he buried it. He didn't just bury it, Caleb said. Look at the dates. He pulled out a timeline he'd drawn up himself, a single sheet of paper with dates running down the left side. For the first year, it was just cost-cutting, deferring maintenance to save money, taking the risk, betting nothing would fail on his watch. Standard corner cutting. Bad, but I've seen worse. His finger moved down the page. But then about 6 months ago, something changed. The deferrals got more aggressive. He stopped even pretending to schedule the repairs for later. And that's the same month. He looked up at Victoria, that the Whitmore investment talk started. Isn't it? Victoria's mouth was dry. Yes. 6 months ago, the strategy flipped, Caleb said. It stopped being about saving money by cutting maintenance. It started being about making the fleet look as bad as possible on paper, while keeping it just barely flying right up until an inspection. Because a fleet that's quietly falling apart. He spread his hands. That's a fleet you can buy cheap. If the inspection had gone the way Caldwell wanted, if I'd signed those sheets, and the inspectors had found 25 aircraft riddled with faults, Ashford International loses its certificate. Stock craters, board panics, and suddenly Whitmore's lowball offer looks like a rescue instead of a robbery. The conference room was silent. Patricia Vance, the attorney, leaned forward. Mr. Turner, what you're describing, do you understand what that is? If you can prove it, that's not corner cutting. That's fraud. That's conspiracy to commit securities, fraud at minimum, possibly reckless endangerment. If a plane had gone down... I know what it is, Caleb said quietly. That's why I kept the folders. Foster had gone through half the timeline now, cross-referencing it against her own inspection findings, and Caleb watched her professional composure slowly give way to something harder, angrier. This lines up, she muttered. Every fault I found in the fleet, you reported it. Months ago. Years, some of them. And every single report was suppressed. She looked up. Mr. Turner, this changes my entire investigation. I came in here investigating a maintenance department that missed some faults. That's a violation. That's fines and remedial training. What you've got here, she tapped the folders, this is deliberate. This is a director who was told in writing repeatedly that his aircraft were unsafe and who chose to hide it. Some of these faults were life-threatening. He knew. He knew, and he sat on it, and he did it on purpose. Victoria stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there for a long moment with her back to the room, and when she turned around, Caleb saw something in her face he hadn't seen before. Not the cold, certain CEO from the hangar, and not the broken woman on his porch. Something in between. Something that had made a decision. I need to tell you both something, she said, and it's not easy for me to say. She came back to the table. The reason Caldwell got away with this for so long isn't just that he's clever. It's that I let him. I built a company where the only voices I listened to were the ones in suits sitting across a conference table from me. I never came down to the floor. I never talked to the mechanics. I took Caldwell's reports as gospel because he told me what I wanted to hear, that the company was efficient, that costs were under control, that everything was fine. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. My father raised me to believe that the people at the top know more than the people doing the work. And Caldwell knew that about me. He counted on it. Every warning Mr. Turner sent up the chain died on Caldwell's desk, and it died there because Caldwell knew I would never ever go looking below him to check. She looked at Caleb. You've been screaming into a void for 2 years, and the void was me. I'm the reason no one heard you. And I have to own that before we do anything else, because if I don't, I'm no better than he is. The room was quiet. Caleb studied her for a long moment. He'd come in with his guard all the way up, ready for her to be playing some angle, ready to be used and discarded again. But there was no angle in what she'd just said. A CEO protecting herself doesn't stand up in front of a federal inspector and a lawyer and confess to being the reason the fraud worked. That took guts, he said finally. Saying that out loud, in front of witnesses. It's the truth. You taught me the truth's worth saying out loud even when it costs you. a ghost of a smile. Especially when it costs you. Isn't that what you told me on your porch? Something like that. Caleb almost smiled back. My daughter says it better. Patricia Vance cleared her throat. This is all very moving, and I mean that sincerely, but I need to bring everyone back to the ground for a second. Because here's our problem. She folded her hands. What Mr. Turner has is extraordinary. It's a pattern. It's motive. It's a timeline that lines up beautifully with the Whitmore talks. But it's circumstantial. Every single piece of it, Caldwell has an explanation for. The deferred maintenance budget constraints, he'll say he was trying to keep the company solvent. The suppressed reports. He'll say they went through proper channels and were assessed and deprioritized by the book. The timing with Whitmore coincidence. She looked around the table. A good lawyer and Whitmore's money can buy a very good lawyer, takes every one of these folders and turns it into a story about a dedicated cost-conscious executive and a paranoid mechanic with a grudge. We've already seen the smear campaign. That's the defense they're building right now. Rogue mechanic falsified records, disgruntled employee. She let that sit. To make this stick to actually prove conspiracy, we need one thing we don't have yet. We need direct evidence that Caldwell and Whitmore were working together. A communication. Something in writing or a witness that shows the two of them coordinating to tank that inspection on purpose. He's not going to have put that in an email, Foster said. No? Vance agreed. Men like Whitmore never do. They use burner phones, private meetings, cash. The coordination happens in rooms with no records. She spread her hands. Which means, unless we get very lucky or somebody talks, we may never be able to prove the conspiracy at all. We can probably get Caldwell on the maintenance fraud with what Mr. Turner has. That alone ends his career and possibly puts him in prison. But Whitmore walks. Whitmore is insulated. He'll express shock and dismay that his prospective acquisition had such a rogue operations director. He'll quietly withdraw his offer, and he'll go do the exact same thing to some other struggling company 6 months from now. The room absorbed this. And then Caleb, who had been quiet, who had been turning something over in his mind, spoke. There might be a way, he said slowly. Everyone looked at him. Caldwell doesn't know I have all this. Caleb gestured at the folders. As far as he knows, I'm just a fired mechanic getting blacklisted, sitting at home ruined. He thinks the smear campaign worked. He thinks I'm neutralized. He leaned forward. And more than that, he's got a problem right now that he's desperate to solve. The inspection didn't fail. The whole plan hinged on those planes failing, and they passed because I fixed them. So Whitmore's deal is falling apart. Which means Caldwell is under enormous pressure to make this work some other way fast before Whitmore walks and leaves him holding the bag. He looked at Victoria. You said Whitmore doesn't fight fair. You said these people are dangerous. Well, desperate people make mistakes. And a desperate Caldwell who thinks his biggest threat is already dead and buried. He let it hang. What happens if that threat walks back into his office? Victoria's eyes widened. You want to go to him. I want to make him think I'm for sale. Caleb's voice was steady, but there was steel in it. I walk into his office. I tell him I know exactly what he's been doing, the deferred maintenance, the buried reports, all of it. I tell him I've got 2 years of documentation, and I'm about to hand it to the investigators and the press and bury him. And then, he paused. I tell him I'd rather get paid. I tell him I've got a daughter, I'm blacklisted. I'm desperate, and for the right number I'll hand over my folders and disappear and forget I ever saw anything. He sat back. A guilty man, a scared man, a man under pressure from an investor who's about to walk, he doesn't call my bluff. He negotiates. And the second he negotiates, the second he offers me $1 to keep quiet about the maintenance fraud, he's admitted it's real. And if I can get him to say Whitmore's name, if I can get him to admit the two of them planned it, you'd be wearing a wire, Foster said slowly. I'd be wearing a wire. Patricia Vance was already shaking her head. Absolutely not. That's incredibly dangerous. You're not law enforcement. You'd be a civilian walking into a room with a man who has every reason to want you gone, trying to entrap a suspect who has powerful, wealthy backing. If it goes wrong, if he figures out what you're doing, then I'm no worse off than I am now, Caleb said flatly. Blacklisted, unemployed, ruined. He's already taken everything except the one thing that matters, and she's at school right now. His voice hardened. But if it goes right, we don't just get Caldwell. We get Whitmore. We get all of it. And no other company gets bought and gutted and turned into a flying coffin because some rich man figured out that failed inspections make for cheap acquisitions. He looked around the table. You said yourself we'll never prove the conspiracy without direct evidence. This is how we get direct evidence. This is the only way we get it. The room was silent. Victoria was staring at him with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read, something between admiration and fear. No, she said finally. Caleb blinked. Victoria, no, not because it wouldn't work. It might work. That's exactly the problem. She stood up. Mr. Turner Caleb, 3 days ago, I fired you because a man in a suit told me you were a problem, and it nearly got 180 people killed, and it cost you your career. I have spent every hour since then trying to figure out how to make that right. And now you want me to send you a single father, the one genuinely good man in this entire mess, walking alone into a room with the most dangerous person in this company wearing a wire to gamble everything again. Her voice cracked. If something happened to you, if Caldwell or Whitmore did something, your daughter has already lost her mother. I will not be the reason she loses her father. I won't. I've made enough terrible decisions with other people's lives this week. The two of them stared at each other across the table. And then Diane Foster, who had been quietly watching the whole exchange, set down her pen. There's a way to do it safely, she said. They both turned to her. He's right that it's the only way to get Whitmore. I've worked cases like this before, not aviation, but fraud coordination between insiders and outside money. The maintenance evidence gets us the department, but the conspiracy... She shook her head. Patricia's right. That lives in a room with no records unless we put a record in the room ourselves. She looked at Caleb. But you don't do it alone, and you don't do it as some amateur sting. If we're going to do this, we do it right. I have contacts at the FAA's investigative division, and they work joint cases with the FBI on exactly this kind of thing. Securities fraud, endangerment conspiracy. We bring them in. We do it under their supervision, with their equipment, with their people in the building. You wouldn't be a civilian walking into danger. You'd be a cooperating witness in a federal operation with agents 50 feet away and a plan for every contingency. She held Caleb's gaze. It's still not zero risk. Nothing is. But it's not you alone against a rich man's money. It's you and the full weight of the federal government, and Caldwell doesn't know it's coming. She turned to Victoria. That's how you protect him. Not by keeping him out of the room. By making sure he's the best protected man in it. Oh, my. Victoria looked at Caleb for a long, long moment. Is this really what you want? She asked quietly. You don't owe this to anyone. You already did your part. You already saved those planes. You could walk away right now, and no one in this room would think less of you. Caleb thought about it. He thought about Lily safe at her little desk at school. He thought about the drawing taped inside his locker. He thought about 180 people on a plane over the ocean who would never know how close they'd come. He thought about the next company, and the one after that, and all the mechanics screaming into all the voids while men in suits counted the savings. When I was fired, he said slowly, I told you I could lose my job, but I couldn't pretend a plane was safe when I knew it wasn't. Remember. I remember. This is the same thing. I know what Caldwell and Whitmore are. I can't pretend I don't. And if I walk away now, if I take the safe road and let Whitmore slip off to gut the next airline, then I spent 2 years keeping folders for nothing. He looked at Foster, then at Vance, then back at Victoria. I don't want revenge. I want it to stop. This is how it stops. He nodded once decisively. Bring in your federal people. I'll wear the wire. And I'll get that son of a bitch to say Whitmore's name if it's the last thing I do." The room was quiet. Then Patricia Vance let out a long breath, pulled a fresh legal pad toward her, and picked up her pen. "All right, if we're doing this, we're doing it airtight. Ms. Foster, get me your federal contacts today. Nothing happens without them signed on and running the operation." She looked at Caleb, and something in her sharp lawyer's face had softened into respect. "Mr. Turner, for what it's worth, in 26 years of practicing law, I've represented a lot of people who called themselves brave. You're the first one I've believed." Caleb almost smiled. "My daughter's braver. She lost her front tooth last month and didn't even cry." Across the city in his glass office, Richard Caldwell was staring at his phone at the message from Whitmore that had been sitting there unanswered for an hour. The inspection was supposed to fail. Fix this, or I find someone who will. He'd tried everything. He'd tried to find a new angle to tank the certification. He'd tried to figure out how 25 aircraft had gotten fixed overnight. And he kept coming back to the same impossible fact, the same name, the same fired mechanic who should have been broken and gone, but who'd somehow single-handedly blown up a plan 18 months in the making. Caldwell didn't know that Caleb Turner had spent 2 years building the case that would destroy him. He didn't know that a federal investigator was at that very moment making a phone call. He didn't know that the man he'd tried to bury was about to walk back through his door. All he knew was that Caleb Turner was still somehow a problem, and Richard Caldwell had spent his whole life making problems disappear. He picked up his phone and typed a reply to Whitmore, handling it. "Give me 1 week. The mechanic's the loose end. I'll make sure he never says a word. And 40 floors below on a street, he never looked down at the war he didn't know he was losing, was already turning against him." The federal team moved faster than Caleb expected. Within 3 days, Diane Foster's contacts had turned into 2 very real, very serious people sitting across a conference table from him. A woman named Agent Ramirez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and a man named Deputy Investigator Cole from the FAA's Enforcement Division. They spent 4 hours going through Caleb's folders, and by the end of it, Ramirez had stopped taking notes and just started staring at him. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I want to make sure I understand. You built this case over 2 years, on your own time, off the clock, while working the night shift and raising a kid alone." "Somebody had to keep the records," Caleb said for what felt like the 100th time. "No." Ramirez shook her head slowly. "Most people, they see something wrong at work, they look the other way. They tell themselves it's not their problem. They keep their heads down and collect the paycheck." She tapped the folders. "You did the opposite, for 2 years, getting ignored the whole time. And you never stopped." She leaned back. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I don't say this often, but you're the real thing. And I'm going to make sure that when this is over, everybody knows it." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. He was never good at this part, the thanking, the admiration. "I'd rather just get it done. What's the plan?" The plan, as Ramirez and Cole laid it out, was simpler than Caleb had feared, and more nerve-wracking than he'd hoped. He would call Caldwell. He would ask for a private meeting. No lawyers, no witnesses, just the 2 of them. He would tell Caldwell that he had documentation of years of maintenance fraud, that he was days away from handing it all to the investigators and the press, and that it would end Caldwell's career and probably his freedom. And then he would offer to sell his silence. "The key," Ramirez said, "is you don't push. Guilty men push back against pressure, but offer them a way out, an off-ramp, and they take it every time. You give him a reason to relax. You give him a reason to think he's solving his problem, and a man who thinks he's solving his problem talks. He explains. He negotiates. He justifies." She slid a small device across the table, smaller than Caleb expected, barely bigger than a button. "This goes under your collar. We'll be in a van in the parking structure, and we'll have 2 agents posing as maintenance staff on the floor below his office. If anything feels wrong, anything you say the word overtime, you work it into a sentence naturally. I've been picking up overtime shifts. Whatever. You say that word and we come through the door. Understand? Overtime," Caleb repeated. "Got it." "We need 3 things from him on tape," Cole added. 1 acknowledgement that he knowingly deferred and concealed the maintenance faults. 2 that he did it deliberately, not by mistake. And 3 the big one, Whitmore. We need him to connect it to Whitmore. To admit the 2 of them coordinated it. If we get all 3, we can arrest them both by the end of the week. If we only get 1 or 2, he shrugged. We get Caldwell. Whitmore walks. Caleb nodded slowly. Then I get all 3. Victoria, who had been sitting silently at the end of the table the whole time, finally spoke. Caleb, can I have a minute alone? The federal agents exchanged a look and stepped out. When the door closed, Victoria didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked at him, and Caleb saw that her hands were clasped tight in her lap, knuckles white. I need you to promise me something, she said finally. Victoria, promise me that if it goes wrong, if Caldwell figures it out, if anything at all feels off, you say the word and you walk out. You don't try to be a hero. You don't try to get one more sentence on tape. You get out. Her voice was tight. I've spent 3 days getting to know who you are, and I know exactly what you'll do in that room. You'll push it too far because you'll be thinking about the next airline and the next set of passengers. You'll take one more risk to make the case airtight. And I'm asking you, I'm begging you, don't. Not this time. This time, you get out. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Why does this matter so much to you? Because... Victoria stopped. Started again. Because 4 days ago, I looked at you and I saw a problem. A stubborn night mechanic making my life difficult. And I fired you without a second thought, without ever knowing your name, without knowing you had a daughter, without knowing you'd saved 180 lives while I slept. Her voice wavered. And now I know exactly who you are. You're the best person I've ever met. And I mean that literally. And I almost destroyed you. And I will not. I cannot send you into danger and have it be one more thing I broke that I can't fix. She looked down. I've spent my whole life being my father's daughter. Strong, certain, never showing doubt. And you know what it got me? A company full of yes men and a fraud running my operations, and the one honest man on my payroll out on the street. I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to be someone who protects the people who deserve protecting. So please, let me protect you. Just this once. Promise me you'll get out if it goes wrong. Caleb was quiet for a long time. I've got a daughter waiting for me at home, he said finally. You think I want to be a hero? I want to make her dinner tonight and read her a story and be there in the morning to cut the crust off her sandwich. He met Victoria's eyes. I promise. If it goes wrong, I'm gone. I'm not dying in Richard Caldwell's office. Lily needs me too much for that. Victoria exhaled, and something in her shoulders loosened. Thank you. But I'm going to get all 3 things on that tape first, Caleb added. Because the only thing worse than taking a risk for nothing is taking a risk that only half works. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it right. Victoria almost laughed, a small helpless sound. You are the most stubborn man alive. My wife used to say the same thing. Caleb's face softened for a moment, then closed again. Let's go catch these bastards. The call to Caldwell happened that afternoon from the federal van with Ramirez listening on headphones and giving Caleb a thumbs up when he was ready. Caldwell answered on the 4th ring, wary. This is Caldwell. It's Turner. There was a long, cold pause. Turner, I'm surprised you have the nerve to call me. After the stunt you pulled. Cut it out, Richard. Caleb kept his voice low, tired, defeated, exactly the voice Ramirez had coached him into. We both know what happened. We both know why you got me fired. And we both know what's in the files I kept for the last 2 years. The pause this time was longer. Much longer. I don't know what you think you have, Caldwell said, but his voice had changed. The confidence had a hairline crack in it now. I've got everything, Caleb said. Every report I filed that you buried, every warning I sent up that you ignored, every deferred maintenance order with your signature on it going back 18 months. I've got a timeline, Richard, and it lines up real nice with a certain investment deal. He let that sit. I'm 3 days from handing all of it to the FAA and a reporter I know at the Times. When I do, you're finished. Career, reputation, freedom, all of it. Caleb could hear Caldwell breathing on the other end. But here's the thing, Caleb continued, and now he made his voice quieter, more desperate, more human. You blacklisted me. I can't get a job. I've got a kid, Richard, 7 years old. Her mom's gone, it's just me, and I can't feed her documentation and principles. So I'm going to make you an offer, and you're going to want to hear it. I don't actually care about you going to prison. I care about my daughter. Make it worth my while. Make it really worth my while, and those files disappear. You never hear from me again. I take the money, I take Lily, and we go somewhere warm, and I forget I ever saw a maintenance report in my life. Silence. Then finally, carefully. You'd want to discuss this in person, I assume. Ramirez pumped her fist silently in the van. Your office, Caleb said. Tomorrow, after hours. No lawyers, no assistants, just you and me. And Richard, he added. Don't get cute. I've got copies of everything in 3 places with instructions. Anything happens to me, it all goes out automatically. So let's just be 2 reasonable men solving a problem. Tomorrow, Caldwell said. 8 o'clock. My office. The line went dead. Ramirez pulled off her headphones. That, she said, was perfect. You gave him a reason to relax and a reason to think you're just a desperate man with a price. He took the bait. She looked at Caleb with something close to awe. Are you sure you've never done this before? I've spent 3 years lying to my daughter about how fine everything is, Caleb said quietly. Turns out, I'm better at pretending than I thought. Not proud of it. The next night, at 7:52 p.m., Caleb Turner sat in the back of a federal van in the parking structure of the Ashford International Aviation Corporate Tower and let a technician thread a wire under his collar while his hands resting on his knees did not shake even a little bit. Victoria was there. She'd insisted. She sat across from him in the van and she couldn't stop looking at him. 8 minutes, Ramirez said. You go up, you take the elevator to 40. His office is at the end of the hall. We'll have you on audio the whole time. 2 agents on 39. If you say the word, we're through his door in under a minute. She checked the wire one more time. Remember, you don't push. You let him come to you. And the second it feels wrong, overtime, Caleb said. I know. Victoria reached across the van and put her hand on his arm. Caleb? He looked at her. Come back down those stairs, she said. That's all I want. Whatever happens up there, you come back down. Caleb put his hand over hers just for a second. I'll be back before Lily's bedtime, he said. I told her I'd call to say goodnight. I've never missed a good night. I'm not starting tonight. Then he stood and he stepped out of the van and he walked toward the elevator. Richard Caldwell's office was on the 40th floor, and it was everything Caleb had expected. Glass and steel and a view of the runway where the planes Caldwell had tried to sabotage were taking off and landing safely one after another in the dark. Caldwell himself was standing when Caleb walked in, and he did not offer to shake hands. Sit, Caldwell said. Caleb sat. Caldwell walked slowly around his desk and settled into his chair, and for a moment, the 2 men just looked at each other. The operations director in his tailored suit and the fired mechanic in a plain jacket with a wire under his collar. You've got some nerve, Caldwell said finally. I'll give you that. I've got a daughter to feed, Caleb said. Nerve's a luxury. Let's talk numbers. Let's talk about what you actually have first. Caldwell leaned back. Because I think you're bluffing. I think you're a desperate man who got himself fired and is trying to shake me down with a bunch of maintenance reports that don't prove anything. Caleb had expected this. Ramirez had prepared him for it. Don't get defensive. Don't oversell. Just lay out one piece calmly and let the fear do the work. The corrosion issue on the 447 series hydraulic fittings, Caleb said quietly. I reported it 18 months ago, fleet-wide. I told you the fittings were degrading faster than the maintenance schedule accounted for, and that we'd have an in-flight failure if we didn't move up the replacement interval. You wrote back, I've got the email, Richard, your name's on it, and you said, quote, budget doesn't allow it, defer to next cycle. He paused. 18 months later, one of those exact fittings was seeping on 447 48 hours before it was scheduled to fly 180 people across the Atlantic. That's the one I caught the night you fired me. That's the one that would have failed at altitude. He held Caldwell's gaze. You were warned, in writing, a year and a half ago, and you buried it. That's not a bluff, Richard. That's a fact, and I can prove it, and a jury's going to understand it just fine. Caldwell's face had gone very still. So no, Caleb continued. I'm not bluffing. I've got 2 years of it, and I'm giving you the chance to make it go away instead of finding out what a federal prosecutor does with an operations director who was told his planes would fall out of the sky and decided to save money instead. The silence stretched out, and then Caldwell did something Caleb didn't expect. He laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was low and bitter and exhausted. You think it was about saving money? He shook his head. God, you really don't know, do you? After all this, you still think I'm just some cheapskate cutting corners on maintenance. Caleb kept his face carefully blank. Then tell me what it was about. Why would I do that? Because, Caleb said slowly, you want me to understand exactly how big this is before I name my price. Because if it's what I think it is, my number just went up. A lot. He leaned forward. I'm not a fool, Richard. Deferred maintenance to save money doesn't get more aggressive right when an investor comes sniffing around. The timing's too clean. So either you tell me what's really going on, and we negotiate like adults, or I walk out of here and hand my files to the FAA tomorrow morning, and we both lose. Your call. Caldwell studied him for a long, long moment. And Caleb watched the man make the calculation, watched him weigh the risk, watched the pressure of Whitmore's ultimatum, and the collapsed deal, and the desperate need to make his loose end disappear all pile up on one side of the scale. Ramirez had been right. A man who thinks he's solving his problem talks. You want to know what it was about, Caldwell said quietly. Fine. Since you're going to be a rich man who keeps his mouth shut anyway, it was about the acquisition. He turned his chair slightly toward the window toward the runway. A profitable airline that passes its safety inspection is worth a fortune. Nobody could afford to buy Ashford outright. But an airline that fails a federal safety inspection, that loses its operating certificate, that gets its name dragged through the press as a flying death trap. He turned back. That's worth pennies on the dollar. That's a fire sale. That's a company you can pick up for a fraction of its value, clean out the certificate problem quietly once you own it, and flip for 10 times what you paid. Caleb's heart was pounding, but he kept his voice level. So you wanted the inspection to fail. I needed the inspection to fail, Caldwell corrected. That was the entire point. Let the fleet degrade just enough. Bury the reports. Keep the planes flying right up until the inspection, and then let the inspectors find a fleet full of deferred faults. Ashford's certificate gets pulled. Stock collapses. Victoria panics. And then a very reasonable buyer steps in with a very reasonable rescue offer. He spread his hands. Everybody wins, except Victoria, who was going to lose the company her daddy built. And I confess, I didn't lose much sleep over that. And the buyer, Caleb said so quietly it was almost a whisper. Every nerve in his body focused on the wire under his collar. The reasonable buyer, that's Whitmore, Alexander Whitmore. Caldwell's eyes narrowed slightly. How do you know that name? Everybody on the floor knows that name, Richard. You think mechanics don't talk? Caleb kept his voice easy, dismissive. The investor's been the worst-kept secret in the building for months. What I want to know is whether it was your idea or his, because it matters to my price. If you cooked this up yourself, you're a small operator, and I'll take a small number. But if Alexander Whitmore came to you and put you up to it, if this was his play, and you were just his man on the inside, then I'm not shaking down a middle manager. I'm sitting on evidence that takes down one of the biggest investors in the country, and that's worth a whole lot more than pocket change. It was the biggest gamble of the whole night. Caleb could feel it. If Caldwell balked here, if he got suspicious, the word was ready on his tongue. Overtime. But Caldwell was too far in now. Too deep in the fantasy of solving his problem. Too proud, maybe, to let a mechanic think he was just some small operator. "It was Whitmore's play," Caldwell said, and the words landed in the room like stones. "Of course it was Whitmore's play. You think I dreamed up a scheme to tank a federal inspection on my own? Whitmore came to me 8 months ago. He'd done it before, found struggling companies, engineered a crisis, bought them for nothing. He needed a man inside operations who could let the fleet degrade without it looking deliberate. He offered me a cut of the profit and a senior position at whatever he flipped the company into." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "We planned it together. Every deferral, every buried report, we coordinated it. He'd tell me how far to let things slide. I'd manage the paperwork so nothing looked intentional. It was clean, it was going to work." His face darkened, and now the bitterness turned toward Caleb himself. And then one night shift mechanic who couldn't mind his own business went through the entire fleet in a single night and fixed everything I'd spent a year and a half carefully letting fall apart. 18 months of work. One night. "You have any idea what Whitmore said to me when that inspection passed?" "No," Caleb said. 3 for 3. He had it all. He had everything. Every word had gone down the wire and into a federal van 40 floors below. "What did he say?" "He said, fix the loose end." Caldwell looked at Caleb, and something cold came into his eyes. You're the loose end turner. And now, here you are in my office offering to sell me the very files that could destroy us both." He leaned forward. "So, let me make you a counteroffer, because I don't think you understand the situation you're in." Caleb felt the temperature in the room change. "You said you've got copies in 3 places," Caldwell said slowly. "Dead man's switch, everything goes out if something happens to you. Very smart, very dramatic." He opened his desk drawer and Caleb's whole body went rigid, but Caldwell only pulled out a checkbook and set it on the desk. "But here's what you didn't think about. Whitmore has people. Serious people. The kind of people who can find those 3 copies and make them disappear right along with the man who made them. The kind of people who can arrange for a fired, blacklisted, disgraced mechanic with money troubles to have a very believable accident." He uncapped a pen. "So you're not going to negotiate with me, Turner. You're going to hand over everything, the files, the copies, the names of everyone you've told, and in exchange, I'm going to make sure that accident doesn't happen. To you. Or..." His eyes flicked up to that little girl of yours. Something in Caleb went very cold and very quiet. For a moment, the desperate mechanic mask slipped completely, and Richard Caldwell got to see just for a second exactly what kind of man he'd actually been dealing with for the last 3 years. Not a problem to be managed, not a loose end. A father. "You want to say that part again?" Caleb said, and his voice had dropped into something low and even and terrible. "The part about my daughter. Say that part again, Richard. Real clear." Caldwell, misreading the moment, thinking he'd finally found the leverage, smiled. "You heard me. Whitmore's people don't make distinctions about who's in the way, so I'd think very carefully about how cooperative you're going to be for her sake. A smart man protects his..." The office door came open so hard it cracked against the wall. Agent Ramirez came through, first weapon drawn, with Deputy Investigator Cole right behind her, and 2 more agents flooding in from the hall. "Richard Caldwell," Ramirez said, crossing the room in 3 strides. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, reckless endangerment, and thank you for the last 30 seconds solicitation to commit violence and criminal threats against a minor." The color drained out of Caldwell's face so fast it was almost comical. He looked at the agents, then at Caleb, then at the collar of Caleb's jacket, and the understanding hit him all at once. "You're wired," he whispered. "You're this whole time." Caleb stood up slowly. He reached under his collar and pulled the small device free and set it on the desk right next to Caldwell's checkbook. And he looked down at the man who 3 years ago had started burying his reports, who 4 days ago had gotten him fired, who 30 seconds ago had threatened his little girl. 18 months you sat on that corrosion report," Caleb said quietly, as Ramirez pulled Caldwell's hands behind his back. 180 people almost died on 447 because you wanted to make a company cheap enough to steal, and you just now sat in that chair and threatened my 7-year-old daughter to make me hand over the proof." He shook his head slowly. "You want to know the difference between you and me, Richard? You spent 2 years trying to make me disappear, and I spent 2 years keeping the receipts. Turns out the quiet man doing the work while nobody's watching." He picked up his toolbox, which he'd set by the chair. He was watching the whole time. Caldwell was still sputtering as they walked him toward the door. "Whitmore you don't understand. Whitmore will bury all of you. You have no idea what he's capable of." "Actually," Cole said mildly, holding up his phone, "we've got a team walking into Mr. Whitmore's residence right about now. Turns out, a recorded confession naming him as the mastermind is enough for a warrant. Funny how that works." They took Caldwell out, and Caleb Turner stood alone for a moment in the glass office 40 floors above the runway, looking out at the planes taking off safely into the night. And then he pulled out his phone, and he checked the time. 8:41 p.m. And he dialed home where the babysitter answered, and a moment later, a small, sleepy voice came on the line. "Daddy." "Hey, Lilybug." Caleb closed his eyes, and for the first time in 4 days, something in his chest came all the way loose. "Just calling to say goodnight like I promised. You brush your teeth." "Uh-huh. Did you fix the planes?" Caleb looked out at the runway, at the lights lifting into the dark, at all the strangers going home safe. "Yeah, baby," he said softly. "I fixed the planes. I'll be home real soon. Save me a spot on the couch." Down in the parking structure in the back of a federal van, Victoria Ashford listened to the whole thing come through the speakers, the confession, the threat, the arrest, and then a tired father calling home to say goodnight to his little girl. And she put her face in her hands, and for the first time since she was a child in front of 2 federal agents and a technician she'd never met. Victoria Ashford wept and did not try to hide it, and did not once think of it as weakness. The arrest of Alexander Whitmore made the national news within 12 hours. By the time Caleb woke up the next morning later than usual, because for the first time in years he'd slept more than 4 hours. His phone was full of messages, and the television in the little living room where Lily was eating cereal was showing a photograph of the billionaire investor being walked out of his estate in handcuffs. The anchor was calling it one of the largest corporate fraud cases in the aviation industry's history. The words securities fraud and reckless endangerment and conspiracy scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Lily looked up from her cereal. "Daddy, that's the man from your work stuff, isn't it? The bad one? One of them, baby." Caleb sat down next to her. "One of 2. Are they going to jail?" "Looks like it." Lily nodded satisfied and went back to her cereal. "Good. You said they wanted to hurt the people on the planes." "They did. But you stopped them." Caleb looked at his daughter, 7 years old, gap-toothed, absolutely certain that the world made sense as long as her dad was in it, and he felt something ache and heal in the same breath. "Yeah, Lilybug," he said quietly. "I stopped them. With your toolbox." He laughed a real laugh, the first one in what felt like forever. "With my toolbox, and a little help." The little help turned out to be an understatement. Over the following weeks, the case unraveled, exactly the way Diane Foster had promised. It would, only faster and more completely. Caldwell facing decades in prison and staring down a recorded confession in which he'd not only admitted the entire scheme, but threatened a child, did what cornered men do. He cooperated. He gave the federal prosecutors everything: the timeline, the financial arrangements, the other companies. Whitmore had gutted the same way over the years. It turned out Ashford International had not been Whitmore's first engineered crisis. It had been his fourth. 2 trucking companies and a regional bank had been bought and stripped using the same playbook: find a struggling firm plant, a man inside manufacture a catastrophe, buy the wreckage for pennies. Caleb's 2 years of quiet, stubborn record-keeping hadn't just saved one airline. It had blown open a pattern that investigators had suspected for years, but never been able to prove, because for the first time someone on the inside had kept the receipts. Agent Ramirez called Caleb personally to tell him. "I want you to understand what you did," she said. "Whitmore's been doing this for over a decade. Careful. Insulated. Always someone else's fingerprints on the crime. Nobody could ever tie him to the coordination until a night shift mechanic got him to say it out loud through a man wearing a wire." A pause. "You didn't just save your airline, Mr. Turner. You closed a chapter that ruined a lot of people's lives over a lot of years. I've been doing this 15 years, and I've never seen one person make this kind of difference. I wanted you to hear that from me." Caleb, standing in his kitchen, didn't know what to say. "I just kept the folders," he said finally. "Yeah," Ramirez said. "You just kept the folders. Most people wouldn't have. That's the whole thing, Mr. Turner. That's the whole entire thing." Victoria came to the house a week after the arrests. She stood on the same small porch where she'd apologized to him days earlier. Except this time, she wasn't a CEO in crisis, and she wasn't a woman falling apart. She was something steadier. When Caleb opened the door, she held up a paper bag before he could say anything. "I brought lunch," she said. "For Lily, peanut butter and jelly, crust cut off. I asked the deli 3 times to make sure, and I brought grown-up sandwiches for us." She hesitated. "If that's all right. If it's not, I understand I can—" "Victoria." Caleb stepped back and held the door open. "Come in." They sat at the small kitchen table, the 3 of them and Victoria Ashford, who ran a company worth over $1 billion, who had grown up in a family where showing up at a mechanic's kitchen table would have been unthinkable. Ate a deli sandwich and listened to a 7-year-old explain in exhaustive detail the plot of her favorite cartoon and the exact circumstances under which she had lost her front tooth. "It just came out," Lily said proudly. "I was eating an apple and it just came out and I didn't even cry." "That's very brave," Victoria said, and she meant it completely. "Daddy says being brave is doing the right thing, even when it's scary." Lily took a bite of her crustless sandwich. "Did my daddy do the right thing at your work?" Victoria looked across the table at Caleb and then back at his daughter, and something moved behind her eyes. "Your daddy," she said carefully, "did the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. He told the truth when it cost him everything. And because he did, a lot of people who fly on airplanes are going to get home safe to their families, and they'll never even know his name." She smiled at Lily. "But you'll know it, and I'll know it. And that's what matters." Lily considered this. "Are you going to give him a raise now, so we can go to the ocean?" "Lily," Caleb warned. But Victoria set down her sandwich. "Actually," she said, "that's part of why I'm here. If your dad will hear me out." After lunch, while Lily went to watch her show, Victoria and Caleb sat at the table over cooling coffee, and Victoria laid it out. "The board wanted to give you a settlement," she said. "A big one. Compensation for the wrongful termination, damages for the smear campaign, all of it. Their lawyers came up with a number that would let you never work another day in your life." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "And I told them no." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You told them no." "I told them no because I know you and I know a check would insult you." She looked at him. "You don't want to never work again. You love the work. You love the planes. What you want is for the work to matter and for the people doing it to be heard. So I have a different offer. And I need you to actually consider it before you say no, because I know your first instinct is going to be to turn it down. Try me. I'm restructuring the entire company." Victoria's voice took on a new energy, something Caleb hadn't heard from her before. Not the cold certainty of the boardroom, but something alive. "Everything that let Caldwell operate, I'm tearing out. The maintenance budget's being restored in full, more than full. Every mechanic on that floor now has the right to ground an aircraft and report a safety concern directly with whistleblower protection written into their contracts, so nobody can ever again get buried or fired for refusing to sign off on an unsafe plane. Nobody screams into a void anymore." She took a breath. "And I'm creating a new position. Director of Aircraft Safety Operations. It reports directly to me, not to operations, not to finance, directly to the CEO. It has the authority to override any executive decision on the grounds of safety. Full stop. No exceptions. It exists for exactly one reason, so that what almost happened never happens again. She looked at him. I want you to have it, Caleb. I want you to build it, because you're the only person I've ever met who I trust to hold that kind of power and never once let it get bigger than the reason it exists. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. That's a big office, he said finally. Directors work days. They do. I work nights, so I can be here in the mornings. Pack her lunch. Walk her to school. That's not negotiable, Victoria. It was never negotiable. It's the whole reason I took the night shift in the first place. Victoria had clearly anticipated this. Then you'll be the first director in the company's history who sets his own hours. Work nights. Work mornings. Work from this kitchen table if you want. I don't care when you work. I care that you're the one holding the line. She leaned forward. Caleb, I spent my whole career believing the people at the top knew more than the people doing the work. It nearly destroyed everything. I'm done running the company from a glass office 40 floors up. I'm going to be on that floor. I'm going to learn the names. And I want the man who taught me why that matters standing right next to me while I do it. A pause. So, will you come back? Caleb looked toward the living room, where Lily was laughing at her show. He thought about the drawing that had been taped inside his locker. My dad keeps the planes safe. He thought about all the nights alone with his flashlight and his toolbox catching the things nobody else caught, keeping promises nobody knew he was making. On one condition, he said. Name it. The whistleblower protections, the right to ground a plane, the direct line to report safety concerns, all of it. He met her eyes. It doesn't just apply going forward. It applies retroactively. Every report that got buried under Caldwell, every mechanic who ever got overruled or ignored or made to feel like a troublemaker for doing their job right, they get an apology in writing from the company, and their record gets cleared. Because I wasn't the only one he did this to Victoria. I was just the only one stubborn enough to keep the folders. There are good people on that floor who learned to stop speaking up because it only ever cost them. I want them to know it's safe now. I want them to know somebody's finally listening. He sat back. Do that, and I'm your director. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and held out her hand. That, she said, is exactly why it has to be you. They shook on it at a small kitchen table in a small blue house at the edge of the airport, and that was how Ashford International Aviation began to change. The changes were not cosmetic, and they were not quiet. Within 3 months, the maintenance floor of Ashford International looked and felt like a different place. The mechanics who had spent years keeping their heads down and swallowing their concerns found to their disbelief that when they raised a safety issue, it went up the chain and something actually happened. Aircraft got grounded when they needed grounding, and nobody got fired for it. The budget that Caldwell had strangled for years flowed back, and old deferred repairs that everyone had learned to live with finally got done. Captain Daniel Brooks, the pilot, who had stepped forward in the hangar that morning to name the man Victoria had fired, told anyone who would listen that in 30 years of flying, he'd never felt safer putting his crew and his passengers on an Ashford aircraft. And true to her word, Victoria Ashford changed too. She did not run the company from the glass office anymore. She was on the floor most mornings in a hard hat, learning the difference between a hydraulic line and a fuel line. Asking questions, listening, actually listening to the men and women who spent their lives keeping her airplanes in the sky. She learned their names. She learned about Walter's bad knee, and finally paid for the surgery. She learned that the coffee machine in the break room had been broken for 2 years and simply bought a new one. Small things. But the men on the floor noticed the small things because the small things were how you could tell whether someone actually cared or was just performing. Victoria cared. It had cost her nearly everything to learn how, but she cared. The written apologies went out just as Caleb had demanded. Dozens of them to mechanics current and former, some of whom had left the industry entirely convinced they were the problem. Convinced that caring about doing the job right was a character flaw. A few of them came back. One of them, a woman named Sandra, who had quit 4 years earlier after being overruled one too many times, cried when she read her letter and framed it and hung it in her new office when she returned as one of Caleb's first hires. Caldwell was sentenced to 11 years. Whitmore, whose crimes stretched back over a decade and across multiple companies and hundreds of victims, got 22. The financial press wrote long articles about the case, about how a decade-long pattern of engineered corporate crises had finally been broken, and buried in most of those articles, usually near the end, was a single sentence about the night shift mechanic whose personal record-keeping had made the whole prosecution possible. Caleb never gave an interview. He was asked many times. He always said the same thing: "I just did my job. Talk to the people who are safe because of it, not to me." He meant it. But the people who knew the mechanics on the floor, the pilots, Ramirez, Foster, Victoria, they made sure the story got told the right way in the places that mattered, even if Caleb wouldn't tell it himself. On the day the first aircraft took off after the full restructuring was complete, a plane that had been grounded, torn down, inspected top to bottom, and rebuilt to a standard the old Ashford would never have paid for. Victoria found Caleb standing at the edge of the hangar, watching with his old toolbox in his hand, out of pure habit, even though a director had no real reason to carry one. She had something in her hand, too. "I've got something for you," she said. She held out a badge, his new one. Director of Aircraft Safety Operations. It read above his name and his photograph. "It's official, as of today." Caleb took it and looked at it for a long moment. Then quietly he reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out something else. An old badge. Worn at the edges, the photograph faded. His original employee badge, the one he'd unclipped and set down on the steel workbench the morning Victoria fired him, the one he'd surrendered without a word before walking out into the cold. Victoria stared at it. "You kept it. I thought that was still in the building. How did you—" "Brooks saved it for me," Caleb said. "Off the workbench after I left. Said he had a feeling I might want it back someday." He held the two badges side by side in his palm, the old one and the new one, the mechanic and the director, the man who'd been fired and the man who'd been asked to lead. "I'm going to keep both." Victoria looked at them. "Why?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, watching the aircraft climb into the morning sky, watching it get smaller and smaller until it was just a point of light heading somewhere far away, carrying a couple hundred people who would land safely and go home to their families and never know how close some of them had once come, or the name of the man who'd made sure they made it. "Because I never want to forget the day I learned that telling the truth can cost you everything," Caleb said. He closed his hand around both badges. "But staying silent can cost a whole lot more. The old one reminds me what it feels like to lose everything for doing the right thing. The new one reminds me that sometimes, not always, but sometimes doing the right thing wins." He looked at her. "A man should carry both, so he never gets too comfortable and never stops being willing to set the badge down again if it ever comes to that." Victoria felt her throat tighten. "You'd do it again, wouldn't you? If it came to that? Even now? Even with everything you've got to lose?" "In a heartbeat." Caleb clipped the new badge to his jacket and slid the old one carefully back into his pocket over his heart. "That's the whole point, Victoria. The day I wouldn't set it down again is the day I stopped deserving to wear either one." He picked up his toolbox. "Now come on," he said. "I want to show you the number 2 hydraulic system on the new bird. You should know what it looks like when it's done right, so you never have to take my word for it or anybody's." And Victoria Ashford, CEO of a billion-dollar airline, followed a night shift mechanic across the hangar floor to learn how to check a hydraulic line, because she had finally understood the thing that Caleb Turner had known all along, the thing that had cost him his job and nearly cost her everything: that a company is not built by the people with the biggest titles or the most money or the fanciest offices. It is built by the ordinary people who care enough to do the right thing when nobody is watching, when there's nothing to gain and everything to lose, when the only witness is their own conscience and a photograph of a child taped to the inside of a locker. That morning in the hangar, when Victoria Ashford had asked, "Who fixed all 25 of these planes overnight?" and 200 people had turned to look at the empty doorway, where a fired single father had just walked out. She had thought she was asking about airplanes. She had been wrong. She had been asking who her company really belonged to, and the answer had been standing outside the doors the whole time, carrying an old toolbox, asking for nothing but the chance to keep strangers safe. It was never the executives. It was never the investors. It was never the men with the biggest titles. It was the single father. They almost lost the man who never wanted power, only the chance to make sure that every person who climbed aboard one of those planes made it home. And from the day Caleb Turner clipped on that new badge and slid the old one over his heart, no honest voice at Ashford International Aviation was ever buried again.